Welcome to the Early Education Conversation, where we discuss the transformative power of early learning with thought leaders, educators, and community members.
Welcome back to the Early Education Conversations. I'm Aruna Gilbert, Chief Program and Policy Officer at the Early Learning Coalition in Palm Beach. Today's conversation is really one I've been really looking forward to because literacy sits at the center of so many of the things we talk about in early learning, but also in workforce, in family stability, and in long-term opportunity. When we talk about school readiness, we often focus on children. But literacy reminds us that readiness is not just about the child. It's generational. It lives in families, in communities, and in systems we build all around them. So I'm really excited to be joined today by Kristin Calder, CEO of the Literacy Coalition of Palm Beach County, an organization that is really thinking about literacy not just as a skill, but as a community-wide infrastructure. Welcome, Kristin.
Thank you, Aruna, for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
I'm so excited. It's finally come to fruition, Kristin. We've been talking about this for a little while.
Yes,
So,
yes, there's a lot going on. All good things, working really hard and trying to really move the needle on our efforts here.
so funny enough, Kristin, as I was looking up all the things about you, one of the things I realized that you and I have in common outside of literacy and children and all of the things is that we both have a degree in journalism.
Oh, how about that?
I know. I was like, oh, look at that. Like, how often do you see that?
And now you've got two communicators on a podcast.
So I always start the podcast with, one question, and that is, what does early learning mean to you?
Early learning is the foundation. For us, it's the starting point. And when I think about early learning and early literacy, it's the roots, it's that foundation that really sets up the trajectory of the rest of the life of, the future, the growth, the opportunities. And so, if you don't have strong roots, it makes it harder to grow and thrive and succeed. So for me, early learning really is about fundamentals, and it's really the foundation of where we begin.
Yeah, I love that. I'm curious though, has that definition shifted for you over time as a leader, but also as a person moving through this work?
I think that not everybody has the opportunity for their roots to start out strong, and that's actually where we come in. We hope that we can catch infants. Our services
Yeah.
are provided infancy through adulthood, but I think even if it's not at the core root level, it is strengthening those roots so that, as they go forward. So whether we meet someone and they're getting those fundamental skills, as a preschooler, as an elementary student, or even later in life, after as an adult, because we do work with many adults throughout Palm Beach County. So it's never too late to try to develop those skills and build that foundation. It just your root pattern looks a little different than the ones that get this, in early stages and in preschool.
Yeah. So you've spent a lot of your career here in Palm Beach County, and you stepped into this role leading such an important organization, and I believe you were a board member there for a while before you stepped into this position.
Yes, so my background, as you said, I do have a degree in broadcast journalism and worked in public relations and for nonprofits, both professionally and then as a volunteer personally, and have about 30 years of experience with leading, managing, promoting, and supporting nonprofits in healthcare, primarily for 13 years at a nonprofit hospital. And at that time, I was becoming more involved, and I was introduced to the Literacy Coalition and was very impressed by the way the organization was run, their mission, what the organization was accomplishing. And so I began volunteering. And then eventually I was able to join the board of directors, which I did for 4 years, and got to work with my predecessor, which was also very insightful, not knowing at the time all the things I was learning from her and, observing the organization. And then now, as CEO for more than 12 years, I come from a background of educators. Both of my parents are teachers, long lines of aunts and uncles who are all teachers. I loved to play school as a child. So it's kind of like, my two worlds collided in what I get to do, in that the Literacy Coalition's mission is to improve the quality of lives in our community by promoting and achieving literacy. And so it's getting to take that education sector that, and the education that I value, and emphasizing that and really promoting that, so that others in our community are aware that there's an issue, and that also that there are ways that we can let them know how they can help and be a part of that solution. So for me, it's kind of like my worlds have collided from, being a volunteer and working in the nonprofit sector, both professionally and then also, personally as a volunteer, and then taking this education and my journalism background. And it just kind of all like came together in this perfect union of what I'm doing now.
Yeah. Do you think that there was when you were thinking healthcare and this nonprofit world and literacy and all of those things, do you think there was a moment when you realized, gosh, literacy, this is bigger than reading, right? It's about life trajectory stuff. Was there a moment that clicked for you?
Well, I can tell you that, even when I was in healthcare, and I do believe if you don't have your health, you don't have anything. But after
Mhm.
that, I think, that if you are not able to read, just the difficulties, the challenges, in your world of how do you even function, how do you even communicate. And I think for people, to try to understand that, imagine if arrive into another country and you don't speak the language, you have no idea where to go, what to do, how to do it. And I think that whole concept of really being helpless and not able to really even help yourself, I think is, that realization of why literacy is so important. And, it could be the matter of life and death. Um, and, speaking of healthcare, so, it is really, it is very important. And I think I realized that in the healthcare sector too, because we worked with a lot of indigent patients. And, but I think definitely, recognizing that the more that I've been involved with my work with the Literacy Coalition.
So, and I'll pivot a little bit to what we're seeing in the data, right? And as we look at data, we know that nearly half of the children entering kindergarten or at the kindergarten level and third grade level are not reading at grade level, right? And we also know that that becomes predictive of so many downstream outcomes. So I wonder if you had some thoughts on, like, how do you explain literacy to someone who kind of sees it as learning to read? And what do you think they're missing when they think of literacy as just learning to read?
Well, I think obviously, it's not just, being able to learn to read. You think about, we say up until third grade, that children and students are learning to read, but once they get to fourth grade, they really need to be able to read to learn. And I think so what that means to me is it's not just about reading, that I want to be able to read a book, or a menu or a prescription bottle. It's really all of the other subject matter. It's everything else going on, for students academically. There isn't a subject that they need to take that doesn't require them to read. So it's really, providing them the opportunity to learn. And if you are able to read to learn, and then you are, learning, so then you're able to acquire all this information. You can be successful in school, have a chance to, graduate and be able to earn a living wage to support your family, whether that be, through a trade, through going on to college or whatever it is. So it's not just about being able to read, it's what reading translates into, when that equation equals learning, and then how that really sets up your trajectory for, having a successful life.
Yeah, what you're saying really connects because what I'm thinking about is as you're talking about reading, starting with foundational stuff as a baby and moving through life, that is the thing that I found really compelling about the work you do over at the Literacy Coalition, because it's not just one approach. You're working across volunteers and families and tutoring and adult literacy, and you've really built an ecosystem of literacy. When I was thinking about that ecosystem, we are often looking at ways of building ecosystems for families. So I know it's really hard to kind of put all the pieces that surrounds something in play. But you guys have done that very successfully in building that literacy ecosystem. And so I'm wondering, what are you seeing that's actually working right now?
Wow. Well, I would say our partnerships are a big part of that. Obviously, like you said, being a part of the system of care, having sustainable programs, consistent funders who recognize the importance of early literacy and value even like getting books into the hands of children and families, and having access to books. I think that is something that we are doing well through our partnership with Children's Services Council and their funding, so that every baby that's born in a Palm Beach County hospital goes home with a book. And I think that's pretty amazing when you think about it. All the papers and the folders and all the things when you take a new baby home, trying to figure out, what you're doing, and the hospital, sends you home with a book. I think that's really should be eye-opening to think, wow, they think that I should be reading to this child in addition to all these other things that I'm supposed to check off, that I'm trying to do to take care of my newborn. And but I think it's really setting the stage and putting it out there for young families to realize this starts now. Reading to the child, letting them hear your voice, eventually introducing the book. And then that partnership continues with our, working with pediatric clinics and pediatricians who, are saying the same thing to families that are bringing in children who, might come in for 14 well-child checkups from birth to 5 years of age. And they're giving the families a book to take home with them. And the doctor talking about the importance of that verbal interaction and reading to your child and, letting them play with the books and introducing books into their home. Which we know are expensive. So, it's wonderful that we can help provide those books. And so that starts all really, in those early years. And I think it's partnerships like that. One of our other programs that we're really proud of is kind of a homegrown program that we created in partnership with the school district of Palm Beach County and more than a dozen years ago. But we are recruiting, training, placing, and supporting right now about 350 volunteers who go into classrooms. Right now we're in 45 schools, a couple of libraries, and then at our Literacy Coalition headquarters, our Bloom Literacy Center in Boynton Beach, after school 3 days a week. But these volunteers are going in and working one-on-one, one-to-one with the same child throughout the whole year, and really helping them improve their reading skills. They're actually complementing what the classroom teacher is doing, because we're able to give them the insight of what the teacher is working on in each grade for that week. And then also really developing a rapport with the child that they're working with, as well as giving them a boost of confidence, adding to their self-esteem. And something that I really learned from you, Aruna, and the Early Learning Coalition when you had Isabel Howell here, who had the Love to Learn book, and she was talking about how only 3% of young children have an older adult friend. And I know these children are a little bit older than maybe she was speaking of, but it's the same context that so many of these children in elementary school, first, second, and third grade, they don't have any kind of relationship with an older adult friend. So many of our community members who come together and volunteer and say, I want to be a part of the solution and work with these children is really significant, and it's having a huge impact, and it's doing a world of good not only for these children and their reading skills and helping them get to reading on grade level, but really boosting their overall confidence and sense of self. And it's also showing in their other academic subjects as well. So I think those are a couple of the things I think I'm most proud of in terms of our partnerships, and whether that be through funders or the community, letting the community be part of the solution as a shared responsibility. I think that's really powerful.
Yeah, so fun fact, I'm one of those volunteers.
Wonderful. Thank you.
And I love it. I absolutely love it. So I don't do the one-on-one, I do the group one. So there's one where we go in as a group and we get a small group of students and we do the activity and the reading. And I typically go over to, I think it's Westward Elementary in West Palm. And I
Yes, I
love
think
it.
that's our Read With Me program, which is a spinoff of Building Better Readers. And the Building Better Readers are the tutors who are working with those first through third and even fourth graders.
Mhm.
And then the Read With Me is reading for fun, to share a joy and love of reading. And that's with the kindergarten students. And we do that at 9 schools 5 times a year. And we always need volunteers for that. And it doesn't require training. You just have to, go through the processes of getting signed up. But as you know, Aruna, I mean, it's a great way to start your day, but also the children and the way they light up. Just the fact that you came in to spend a little time with them and they get to take the books home with them. It's really wonderful to see.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for our listeners out there, if you have not done reading with a child in their classroom or in their childcare or whatever, you really should. At first I have to admit, I was a little nervous. I'm like, what if they ask me questions I don't know? What if, they had like all of these things, but I absolutely enjoyed it. And the other volunteers who were there were so wonderful. It was really a great moment for me when I started doing that. And it made me realize that what we are doing isn't just about access, right? To content necessarily, but it's also about interaction and repetition and meaning making over time. And I really enjoy those moments. So I'm glad you brought it up because I was going to tell you I'm one of your volunteers, Kristin.
It's so wonderful, and it's really wonderful to see, and thank you for giving the time to do that, because as you and I both know, sometimes children don't have one-on-one time with a caring
Mhm.
adult during their day. Not in their family, not in their school classroom. It's just not realistic. And so whether it's one-on-one or even in a small group like that, for you to show up and say, I'm here for you, and we're going to read this book together, and you get to ask them questions and they ask you questions, and you talk about the book and you do a little activity related to the theme of the book. And I love it because this year we were able to give 2 books for each of the days. And whether it be talking about perseverance, or what are your dreams and what kind of person do you want to be when you grow up? Not just what do you want to be, but who do you want to be? And topics like that, to just let children have a few minutes from that academic rigor to just embrace that time with a caring adult that has shown up for them, to share a joy and love of reading, is really magical. So thank you for being a
Absolutely,
volunteer.
without doubt. Whenever I do it, it's always the highlight of my day. So without a doubt.
Good.
So I want to shift a little for a little bit and really talk about, that space and literacy. From time to time, I wonder if we're over institutionalizing literacy and making it something that only happens in programs rather than in just daily life reading. Because I think about, when I was growing up and reading was just part of our daily existence. You either, for me, I am a Hindu, and so either my mom was reading the Bhagavad Gita, or she was reading at night before we went to sleep, a bedtime book. And so it was just part of our day. And sometimes I wonder about that. What do you think we're still getting wrong about literacy, if anything?
Well, I think, like you said, the fact that, if somebody is, especially a child, said, you can't go out and play until you read this book,
Yeah.
or you can't, go do something you want to do, it becomes the negative as opposed to the positive.
Mhm.
And I think sometimes it's when it's put in front of children like that, I think it is a negative. And I think if people can present it in a different way, and that children are reading, getting to pick out the books they want. And it's not it's great that there is, if there's a designated reading time, but even a few minutes every day. And I always hear people say that, letting children pick out the books that they want to read. I love it because it doesn't matter what they're reading as long as they're reading. And graphic novels or comic books, as they were called, for example, is something that comes up a lot. That people would say, oh, that's not really reading, if you're reading a comic book or a graphic novel. But, graphic novels are known, to provide so many different thought processes that are really good and stimulating for children cognitively. It's not necessarily just light reading, but all the visual and textual storytelling can actually, help with comprehension and boost vocabulary, and it's something that they're interested in. So I see that, like with Dog Man and Diary of a Wimpy Kid, and some of these others. And
Yeah.
and so if letting children read those, grasp those storylines, get involved with those characters, and that will eventually lead to, I think, more complex, books that they would be interested in reading. But, I think it is a way to engage reluctant readers and to make something be a positive rather than a negative. And, if they're not reading something they like, introduce something else, because it should be a positive. It should be a plus. If children see adults reading, that's also a plus. I
Mhm.
think, letting them see what is it in there that, has my parents' attention, that's not their cell phone, or, that's not a screen of some sort. And so I think part of that is that it's contagious. And I also think that, and I know because I have three children, and sometimes you have to just, provide what you can to
Mhm.
entertain a child. I think people are really quick to give an electronic device to children to entertain them.
Mhm.
And I think, that's why even keeping books, I always say anywhere, anytime, everywhere learning kind of thing,
Mhm.
keeping books with you, or, being available to spend that time with your children in that, in talking and engaging with them, it can be really beneficial, and support those reading habits, even if it's just a few minutes a day.
Yeah, and I believe if literacy isn't grounded in relationships and language and interaction early on, all we're really doing is trying to catch up later, right? Because,
Absolutely.
it's grounded in everything we do. And I think back to my early learning days, what I think about is my mom cooking and having cookbooks. And that's kind of what
Mhm.
sparked my interest in learning. I was always a foodie, Kristin. So just it's just moved into from reading cookbooks and watching my mom cook and all of the things, and thinking forward to my daughter and how she learned. It was just, she was an incredibly curious child. So as we would go on walks and she would find something new, we would go back and find a book on that thing and we would read about it. And all of the things. So I think it's
That's
really grounded
wonderful.
in those things.
And the books are just such great exposure, for a child to learn about something through a book that they would never have otherwise learned, or know a word, or for their vocabulary, just their ideas. So much of it allows them to get exposure, to open their world, really, to broaden their life, through reading. And so, and that's why the books that we select too, are the same, that we want them to be high quality books that children can read and be introduced to. And then hopefully, that just is the start, and it builds from there, for them to see what they can get out of learning and by reading.
Yeah, and you mentioned, somewhere along there about, tablets and taking, children's time. And, I started thinking about, what literacy needs to become as we're looking at the next 10 years, right? And wondering if reading is enough anymore, or is it about more about interpretation and critical thinking for children? So as we're preparing children not just to read, but to navigate and question the information that's coming at them. Do you think technology is reshaping literacy in probably ways we're not fully paying attention to?
Well, I think, we get this question sometimes, all these books, what are you going to do with all these books? Aren't people just reading on their phones and their tablets? And that is for sure reading, but nothing takes the place of a book, on, sitting down and putting the child on, on your lap, and having the book open and tangibly in your hands, that you can, so I think that I don't see that, especially for children, going away. I think it's just trying to encourage more of it. Um, I think screens do play a part in learning, and there are some, good things about that, but it can't be the only thing.
Mhm.
And I think that's, just making sure that books still have a presence. We get a lot of calls from organizations, from schools that say to us, we don't have any school, books in our classroom. We're partnering right now with the Junior League of Boca Raton, who's doing a classroom refresh for 30 teachers, in the south part of the county. And they each are getting $1,000 worth of new books for their classroom library. And so we've had great fun, working with the teachers so that they could each select their books, and they're going to come this week and pick them up. But that just shows, I mean, that the teachers really, value the books, and the children value the books. If we just have to keep introducing it to them and keep making them available, because we know the screens are always going to be available. So
Yeah.
I don't think one is going to, take place of the other, but it certainly does change things. But it also, from a pro side, and a positive, it does make books accessible too. That if you are
Mhm.
reading on a screen, or able to look up words or other things that would have been difficult to do in the past. But I still believe that nothing's going to replace the actual book, especially for young children.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. As you know, we use technology in our four-year-old classrooms, but it's more as sort of an assessment tool where we're using it for 10 to 15 minutes a day. And what it really drove home for us was the ability to understand what children were currently learning, what they were emerging in, and then also what they had mastered and not known anything about. And so understanding what was happening with that child in their trajectory of learning and reading, it's also given us that opportunity to pivot that information into the classroom so that the teachers can really figure out how to individualize and collectively help children in that classroom to move readiness. And we've seen tremendous movement having done that. But I do believe that you're right, that, books should always be part of that piece of learning and literacy, because it is the relation piece that binds the teacher, the child, the mom, the child, and the environment and the child. And so I do agree with you. There is a way to work smarter, but there's
Yes.
also definitely reasons to have books in place, right?
Absolutely, I agree as well. And it's great that that technology is supporting that, education in the same way. So that's wonderful to hear too.
So as we're wrapping up, one last question. If you could shift one thing in how we think about early learning and literacy, what would that be?
Well, I wish that it didn't seem to be like that it would be that it didn't have to be something that took so much effort in
Yeah.
that it was just something that was innate. And I think that's what we're trying to do in that, introducing it and sending it home with a newborn. Like, here's all the important things you have to know to take care of your child. And by the way, there's a little book in there, So I think that the idea that, that if I could shift that it would be that it's difficult or that it's challenging, because it isn't really. And we know, because we've partnered with you too so many times on campaigns, just even like reading 15 minutes a day. You think about how long you have in your day, just taking 15 minutes
Yeah.
to read. So I think if we could remove that it's such a difficult thing, and just let it happen and think this is really special time that I'm going to bond with a child. And by the way, I would love to read to my high schooler, if we could do that, and you just read aloud for 15 minutes and let them listen to you. And sometimes my younger son, we used to do that and alternate pages, in the book. And it was great, because then there were parts he had to read and then I would listen, and then vice versa. So, I think if we could just remove that out, that this is a chore, and that it's a really hard thing to do, and that actually to see just the positive, to shift that thinking, to think, wow, isn't this going to be wonderful to get to spend 15 minutes with my child at any age, and spend that time reading and discovering a story and sharing that together. I think that's wonderful. And I just hope people could embrace that and think this is a really happy, wonderful opportunity to get to do together.
That's such an awesome answer. Yeah, I'm really taking away from this conversation is literacy is not just a skill, it's a system, it's a relationship, and it's foundation for everything we want for children and families. Kristin, thank you so much for the work you're doing in Palm Beach County and for our children. And definitely thank you so much for this conversation and for spending some time with us today.
Thank you. And thank you for all that you do. Really, you make so many things happen for young families and, young children. And it's really wonderful to get to partner with you and to see the good work that you're doing. So thank you.
Absolutely. And to our audience, thank you for joining us today, and we hope to see you next month. Please feel free to send us suggestions of who you would love to hear from on our podcast. And if you have not visited the Literacy Coalition or had the joy of volunteering with them, please do so. It's an amazing agency doing incredible work in Palm Beach County.